I actually work with Sunrun. I'm actually the person who put solar on 15,000. So I wasn't sure how advanced this class was, so I kind of did a little bit of everything. So what I'll be going over today is on the micro level how solar panels work and all the incentives that the government is trying to push forward, because as we know, our grid is based off of coal. And as many of you guys know, coal is a finite resource. So it will end at some point, and we need to be proactive in finding different ways to create energy. So solar's been around forever. Before I was born, before Christine was born, for a long ass time, really. Now, as you saw in that one video, right now, the way 99% of all the electricity in the United States and in the world is being produced is by heating water up, creating steam, turning a turbine, and that turbine then creates electricity. Solar is a little bit more of a direct way to do that. So this first slide, it's a little bit of chemistry in here. So not sure if you guys know this, but solar panels use the most abundant amount of energy out there, which is the sun. And it uses the second most abundant resource in the world, which is silicon, which is sand. So sand is basically what makes up solar panels. Now, solar panels have two distinct, or actually more layers, but two major layers. They're called the N-type and P-type layers. So the N-type, basically for you guys to remember this, N meaning negative and E meaning positive. So there are two separate types of layers. We have the N-type, which is a silicon, basically wafer with a phosphorus atom right smack dab in the middle. Now, if you guys know anything about phosphorus, it has 5 valence electrons, which means 4 of those electrons are hitting the silicon, which means it has 1 free electron, making it a slightly negative structure. Then we have the P-type, which uses boron, which only has 3 valence electrons, so it actually has a hole, meaning that that charge is slightly positive. So what we have here is how it's sandwiched together. So we have the N-type, which is the phosphorus silicon wafer, and the P-type, which is the boron silicon wafer, which kind of causes a gradient between the two. Now, what happens is photons, meaning the sun, so the higher the amount of photons, or the more strength is the sun, hits the solar panels, it excites that free valence electron, and once that gets excited, it hops over the grid and finds the hole that it needs to go into, which causes an electric current. Now, that is a lot more direct way, simply creating a electric current by photons than heating up water, creating steam, having the steam travel to spin a turbine to create magnets spinning around, which creates an electric charge. So this is a lot more direct way to create electricity. However, not all 100% of the solar spectrum is usable. So realistically, about 20% of all of the radiation that the sun causes actually gets converted into electricity. Now, with just these two sandwich layers, nothing's going to happen. We need to have a closed circuit, okay? So if you know anything about electricity, if the circuit is broken, that current stops, and you don't have electricity. So what happens here is photons hit the N-type, knocking off an electron. The electron is then going through the current, doing whatever your load is, whether it be light or AC, whatever the case may be, comes back and creates and fulfills the circuit. So that is how, on the micro level, how solar panels work. Now, on the bigger scale of things, so we kind of went over what kilowatts, kilowatt hours. So watts are the smallest electrical unit. Now, I know we're in the United States and we don't really like to use the metric system a lot, but even though it's a lot easier to deal with, kilo means 1,000, mega meaning 1,000,000, and just the lonely watt meaning 1. So that is the smallest amount of measurable energy for electricity, and then we have mega, giga, tera, meaning million, billion, trillion watts of electricity. Now, one thing that you guys should know is the amount of sun that, or the amount of electricity that we consume in a year, we can produce with solar panels with a 10,000 square mile area of the United States. Now, that may seem like a lot, but if you think about on a map, pretend this is the map of the United States. 10,000 would be like that dot on the eye. So with that small amount of land, if we are able to utilize that small amount of land with solar panels, we can produce 100% of the United States consumption of electricity, right? Now, the way solar works, especially in Maryland and other parts of the grid, so we have, you saw the 3 separate parts of the grid that are in the United States. We have Texas, who always wants to be by themselves, and we have the Western, which is California, and then we have the Eastern grid, which is us here. Now, the Eastern grid has what is called a net meter. So, where you guys have heard about batteries and storage and things like that, they're basically a non-necessity on the Eastern grid because our grid has a much bigger storage facility. On the California side, you basically need to talk about batteries in those states. Now, for what matters for us, how solar works and how the electricity works in all the grids, actually. The sun shines on the panels. Panels create a current, which is direct current. So there's DC and AC current. Did you guys know the difference between those two? All right. So DC current is like your battery, like a little battery that is DC current. AC current is what is coming out of these, the outlets in your wall right now. This is what we actually use, and that is kilowatt hour of electricity or megawatt hour of electricity, depending on the amount. Panels produce DC current. The inverter, which changes the DC current into alternating current, and then is going right to, you guys seen the meter on outside of your home or apartment, that little glass bulb. That is a meter which counts how much electricity that the utility provider is going to charge you for, all right? So this meter will be a bi-directional meter if you were to go solar. This counts how much electricity you put on the grid versus off the grid. So if you're putting 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity onto the grid and you only consume 10,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, that means you don't buy any electricity from the power grid, all right? Once it goes out to the grid, it literally is sold to your neighbor. It's used by you. It goes to a storage facility, it goes to transformers. But what matters is that that meter kept a record of what you consumed and what you used, and that's how you know, well, that's how the utility company knows how much they need to charge you or not charge you. Here. So the next thing is every home good for solar? No, not every home is good for solar. I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but if you live in a forest, solar's not good for you, unless you want to remove a bunch of trees. So, as you guys know, we live on the northern hemisphere. So up here, we have a orientation of a roof, all right? So south-facing roofs in the United States are the best roof sections for solar, subtracting all the trees. Northern sections of roofs are the absolute worst, and East and West are kind of like a C average student, all right? They're, okay, I passed, but not the best. Now, the reason behind that is because where we're located. So we're located on the northern hemisphere, so as you can see, this roof plane would be a southern roof plane. And you can see how much more area and direct sunlight that this roof gets than this small little north section, because it's indirect. So for solar panels, it makes 100% sense. The more sun, the more electricity, and that's exactly what we care about. So east-west facing roofs, as you know, as the sun rises in the morning and sets in the evening, east-western facing roofs get really good sun in the morning or night, and vice versa, all right? Now, other homes that are not good, say you have a really good home with a lot of these dormers. That is a solar rep's nightmare, because even though that is a good section of roof, we have no places to put those panels. So northern facing roofs, tree coverage, slate roofs. Well, if you ever live in Baltimore like I do, we're covered in slate roofs. You can't put panels in there. And of course, dormers. Next thing is government programs that are trying to basically solidify solar as being our next main energy provider. So old electricity is fossil fuels, coal, oil, burning that, creating steam, turning a turbine, but guess what? Those things are going to run out. So I don't think there's any more dinosaurs being made and dying and being buried in creating coal. So the resource that we're using is the sun, because it is going to last forever. And when I mean forever, I mean as long as it matters for us, because no sun, no us. So if the sun goes out, we have more things to worry about than electricity. Now, a bunch of other incentives, federally, state, and in some cases county, that are trying to push homeowners to kind of create a new grid, a sustainable grid. So first things first, federally, a new, in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed. What that bill was in place for was to actually incentivize homeowners to own their solar system. What that actually made it possible for the federal government to basically refund you 30% of the cost of any solar project. State, so we have the Clean Energy Jobs Act, the Maryland Energy Administration, and solar renewable energy certificates, what are called SRECs. I'll get into a little bit more into that. And then we have county property tax incentives. There are 4 counties in the state of Maryland that give property tax incentives for homeowners that decide to go solar. So first things first, the Inflation Reduction Act. This is a federal program that allows homeowners to receive 30% of the cost of their solar project refunded to them in the form of a federal tax credit. Now, the federal tax credit is basically, we all have to pay taxes. We either pay taxes or we're going to jail, or unless you're lucky and you're tax exempt. So what the federal government is doing is saying, hey, instead of you paying your taxes, we are going to say you have prepaid X amount of dollars in your taxes, so that it's more money in your pocket. Now this money also includes costs of roofs, electrical upgrades, structural upgrades, and things like that around your home, in case you need to get these upgraded in order to go solar. So if you have a bad roof, you're thinking of going solar, the federal government is going to not only pay for the roof, but also pay for the solar as well. This bill has been in place until 2020 or 2032. Now, technically it goes to 2034, but the 30% mark is at 2032. 2033, the federal tax credit drops to 26%. 2034, it drops to 22%, and then 2035 is 100% to the homeowner. So that means you're flipping 100% of that bill. recommend looking up on, reading up on this. There's a lot of information. Next thing is the state of Maryland. So just in the state of Maryland, we have the Maryland Energy Administration. Maryland Energy Administration, so as long as you live in the state of Maryland, they give out grants for homeowners to go solar. Now, a grant is a legitimate $1,000 check that you get if you decide that you want to own your solar system. So solar's been around for a lot of years. About 4 or 5 years ago, it was unheard of for homeowners to own their solar system. You did see solar on homes, but those homeowners didn't own it. It was actually the company putting the solar on the home, and then you are required to pay for that electricity that the solar system is producing. The way we want to change this is ownership. So that means the homeowner, you guys eventually will be homeowners. You understand what equity is, right? All right, so owning a solar system versus leasing a solar system is a much better scenario because you have added equity. You have much more money that you can take a loan out at a later date. If you want to refinance a home, you have more money that you can do whatever you want, whether it's invest, school, payments for college, because I know I was there as well. But this is why Maryland is incentivizing owners or homeowners to own their solar system versus renting it, all right? Another thing is solar renewable energy certificates. So what this is it's kind of a two-part. So the Clean Energy Jobs Act actually mandated this. This is money that you get for producing clean energy, all right? The state wants clean energy, and they're actually mandating that we have to be a certain percentage by a certain year. So because of this, every time your system produces a megawatt hour of electricity, you get one certificate. Now this certificate varies, supply and demand, how much it is based on the time of the year. So right now, every time your system produces a megawatt hour of clean energy, you get about $59 per. Now, a megawatt hour of energy is not a whole lot. Our home probably, on the average in Maryland, consumes about 12,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, which is 12 megawatt hours of electricity per year. So this is just more incentivization for you to go solar and own your system, because you get this money for the life of your system or the life of the program. Next we have is the Clean Energy Jobs Act. This is probably the main thing in Maryland that has put a good firm hold in solar and our state's initiative to go solar. So it was a law passed in 2019 by Governor Hogan. Now, this law originally started back in 2015, but was not passed because of the title. So it used to be called the Solar Carve-Out. Now, whenever you're putting something into the government, you want both parties to kind of agree. So if you have, like Maryland, we're Democrats sometimes, we're Republicans sometimes. I don't care your political views or care. But in order to get a bill passed, you need to it has to be eye-opening to both parties. Now, one thing that they did was they changed the title to the Clean Energy Jobs Act, which means that, hey, not only are we going to be more green energy, but we're also creating jobs. So more jobs, more revenue, which also means more of the state can tax us. Because the more jobs in Maryland, that means the state is going to take their taxes, and it's a machine. So what this Clean Energy Jobs Act did was it required Maryland to be 50% renewable by the year 2030, all right? This also required Maryland to create thousands and thousands of jobs. I am one of them. So back in 2018, when I started this job, there were about 15 of my position, all right? Today, we have about 75 in my same office. And it was all due to this Clean Energy Jobs Act. So the solar industry in Maryland has grown exponentially. It has put millions, no, actually close to $1 billion into solar in just Maryland. And I can attest to that because the amount that I was making in 2018 to now has quadrupled. This Clean Energy Jobs Act not only made it feasible for Republicans to vote on it, but of course also Democrats, so that way this bill takes a foothold. Now, when I showed you the previous slide for SRECs, this is the driving factor in how much money that you get from SRECs. So the more renewable that our state is mandating, the more money that we get. Now, the only other, well, there's 3 other states that outdo us in green energy. That is Massachusetts, New Jersey, and technically not a state, but DC. All 3 of those states are 100% renewable. Now, their SRECs go from, instead of $60, which we are at now, DC goes to $400. New Jersey and Massachusetts are about $235. Their green energy initiative almost makes it so the homeowner doesn't have to pay a penny to own their system. So if you see anything in the state that wants to push more green energy, please vote on it, because that means I'll make more money. And if you want a job, you can come talk to me, and I'll get you a job as well. This job, or this Clean Energy Jobs Act also implements fines to the utility company for producing and buying dirty energy out of state. So before this Clean Energy Jobs Act was implemented, the way we got power, we didn't really produce power in Maryland. We had 2 coal burning facilities in Maryland, and that only produced about 15% of our electrical needs in Maryland. The way we were buying electricity was from Pennsylvania and Ohio. So Pittsburgh, which was the coal mining capital of basically the United States, and Ohio, which produced that coal to turn it into electricity. So we were actually buying all this electricity from out of state, so all the money that we had in state was going out of state. So this Clean Energy Jobs Act made all that money that we were buying from Pennsylvania and Ohio to keep that in our state, so we had more revenue. Next, we have county incentives. So as of right now, we have Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, and Harford County that are on the forefront of trying to get their counties as green as possible. So Baltimore County and Prince George's County is a $5,000 property tax credit for homeowners to own their solar system. Now, if you don't know what a property tax credit is, well, then that means you probably don't own your home yet. Property tax is something that we always have to pay, all right? They're basically saying, you know what? We're gonna give you a $5,000 credit to that. Now, Anne Arundel County and Harford County, they're giving a $2,500 property tax credit for the same thing. So as long as you own your system, you get a $2,500 property tax credit, which means that that's less money that I have to spend. And that's pretty much all I have. So I was gonna leave the last bit for any questions or anything that you guys might have.
So you said the one IRA Act of 2022 extended to 2034 technically. What happens after that? Are they gonna like pass a new act to extend it, or is it just?
Maybe. So that IRA, there was an act before that. It ended 2022. So it was 26% on 2022. Literally, does anybody remember when all those planets aligned in like close to Christmas? So it was literally passed that day. So right before the new year, it was supposed to go away. It was supposed to go from to 0%. They passed it 5 days right before the new year to keep it 26%, or keep it 30%. What will happen in 10, 15 years? I don't know. That is completely government. But it did happen once. Don't know if it'll happen again. But it all depends on what happens in the next 10 years. So if our grid becomes, a solar grid, it's probably not going to happen because we've met what we wanted to do. And what that means is anyone after that, they just, have to pay the retail price. So,
How does the weather play into it?
So, perfect. So the weather. So as you know, we're not producing electricity during the night. All right. So during the day, you are actually producing about 2 to 3 times, especially in the summertime, the amount of electricity than you're actually consuming. That goes to the grid and then is stored there until you actually need it at night. Same goes for winter, foggy days. Now, cloudy and foggy days, you are still producing a good amount of electricity. People think, oh, just because it's foggy, you're not producing anything. So, solar panels actually optimally work in cooler climates. So, even though it's like an overcast, you're still getting a lot of UV radiation through that, but the amount that the panels are not heating up to actually produce a good bit of electricity during those times. Now, you have to use your judgment. If it's like a hurricane out where it's like dark out, yeah, you're not really producing anything. But on average, your system, so I'll backtrack a little bit. There's a lot of other numbers that we use to calculate how much electricity that this system produces. We use this term called sun hours. Now, it uses a bunch of different factors. It uses the location of where we are geographically, and it also uses local weather patterns. So, in Florida, you're going to have a much higher sun hours because you're closer to the equator, so the power of the sun is a lot higher. But you would think that Colorado, which is a lot higher up, a lot closer to the North Pole, it would have a lot less sun hours. That is actually not the case. They're about the same because you are, in Colorado, you're taking out the clouds completely. You are, it's the highest city in the United States. And the sun hours in Florida and Colorado are about the same because you're not taking into consideration weather patterns. So there's a lot of other things that I didn't want to get into because it's a rabbit hole, but weather is taken in consideration when seeing if you're going to be fit for solar. That's why we don't use really Washington State that much because it's horrible. Any other questions?
Going back to the property tax credit that you would get if you owned your own system, what would happen if you lived outside city limits? Because then you would have paid property tax.
So it's two. So are you talking about Baltimore City or?
Just like anywhere.
So if you live outside that county, you're not paying those property tax. So if you were living in Montgomery County does not have a county incentive. If you are in the confines of Baltimore County, Prince George's County, Anne Arundel County, or Hartford County, you're paying those taxes, and if you went solar, you would file the paperwork, and when you pay property taxes, you would have a credit for X amount of dollars that you don't have to spend. So yeah, if you're not in that county, it won't affect you. Any other questions? All right.
I have one.
Yep.
So, obviously I'm biased, we work together, but, have you seen these credits helping or encouraging people to want to go solar?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. That's why I typically work in DC now. I got a license to work in DC. DC is a whole other show. That's basically free solar down there. Maryland is, as long as your home qualifies, it's cheaper than what you're paying now from the utility company, in most cases. But these incentives have driven, so about 5 years ago, it was about 0.5% of the population in Maryland had solar panels. And they did solar for close to 12 years. So 12 years until that time, there was 0.5% of the population had solar on their home. In the past 4 years, that 0.5% has gone up to 4.5%. So it has almost 10 times the amount of solar in 5 years than what happened in 12 years. So it has really ramped up the amount of solar. Yep.
So you were talking about like hypothetically, if you were just take 10,000 acres, you just do like build solar panels in the United States?
Yeah, well, so if you use like Texas or like a good area, that had, good sun hours. But yes, if you took a 100 mile by 100 mile square and you put solar panels in, let's say, Nevada, that would produce all the electrical needs of the entire United States.
So using that, you wouldn't have to have like a solar panel actually attached to your house, but just like the grid, because the power being the grid.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yeah, it would be attached to the grid. Now, there's a lot of other things that are in the works. So one thing with the grid is the storage facilities. Now, they're talking about two different things. So as you guys have seen, the EV vehicles, so the electric vehicles, there's different ways they're trying to figure this out, where basically your car will be the storage facility for the grid. They haven't worked out the plans, but if everyone eventually stops using fossil fuel cars, which is gonna suck because I'll miss my truck. But you will basically be the storage facility for the grid. So your battery, when you park at your home and you plug it into your home, that battery will be the storage facility for your home and things like that. That's what they're planning on, but there's a lot of ideas out there. What will happen, I don't know. Yep.
What do you think is like the main reason why, like, if solar panels are like really good for the environment and everything, like, what do you think is the main reason why people don't switch to them? Do you think it's cost?
So a lot of it is cost. Not every home's good for solar. So there's people with bad taste in their mouth with solar. And there's always the people that are like, let's wait and see. I'm gonna wait for my neighbor to get solar. I'm gonna wait for this. And honestly, a lot of people don't know about all the incentives because, unless they look it up themselves, they would just go on their life without knowing. But because of all the new changes, there's just a lot of information out there that a lot of people don't know about. And that's what brings my job, because I literally have to talk to hundreds of people a day about this, and sometimes it's a crapshoot where like I'll get someone interested and their home is in a forest, or they're covered in dormers, or their home just isn't a good fit. But if your home's a good fit, it's good for you. If it's not, it isn't good for you. Like, I have some homes that are producing 2 times as much electricity as their home needs, and I have some homes where I would say, listen, I'm not putting solar in your home. Like, I don't care if you want it or not, I'm not doing it. So, no. Any other questions?
How do you maintain solar panels? Cause I understand you have to like clean them periodically.
Not really. So, everybody remember the Voyager and Voyager 2? That's the satellites that went through our solar system and are now outside of our solar system. So those solar panels on there are still actually functional. Now they're so far away from the sun that they're not functional, but these panels have roughly about a 65-year lifespan. Now, most panels right now are self-cleaning, so they have a low friction rate. So rain time, that's all the cleaning you need. Monitoring is basically the only thing you need. So if your panel is, you know, defective or cracked or something like that, as long as something doesn't, bless you, as long as something doesn't strike it, you know, these panels are very reliable. You know, the only thing that, I may say is panels do degrade, just like anything in the sunlight, but the degradation rate, are you guys familiar with half-life? Okay, so the degradation rate on solar panels are a 0.03% per year. So if you do the math on that, these panels become 90% efficient after about 30 years. So what that means is you have something 30 years old, but it's still producing 30 or 90% of what the output was day one. That's pretty damn reliable. Yep.
What is the normal lifespan of solar panels?
So there's polycrystalline and monocrystalline. Polycrystalline are those blue panels. They had about a 45-year lifespan, like productive lifespan. The monocrystalline panels are closer to 65, 75 years. So that's, you know, producing about 85% of what the output was year one. But they last much longer than that. Yep.
I also had another question about the solar panels and what the government's doing to encourage more use of solar panels. Because I've had previous experience with solar panel companies, and they said like normally they last about 2 years or so, and the solar panels you don't own them, you have to basically rent them, you pay the company a monthly fee for them. With this new policy or this new law that was passed in 2019 that allows 30% of the cost of solar panels to be funded by taxpayers, is that really true? And it would kick these companies out of the water saying, this is what we're doing now, so deal with this. So all these companies who encourage these people to buy solar panels, but they gotta pay them a monthly fee just to have them. With this new law, do we actually get, you said we actually get to keep them?
Yeah, they're yours. So it's kind of like paying a mortgage for your electricity versus renting it. So yeah, 5 years ago, my company, the only way we would do solar panels were we leased them because all these incentives were out there, which was basically you're gonna just buy the energy at a fixed rate and you're locked in for 25 years, and after that 25 years, my company would have made enough money to stay in business. But the way it's working now, the federal government is basically going to refund you 30% of the cost of the system. So for easy numbers, let's say the system costs $50,000. That means the federal government is going to give you a check for $15,000. If you live in Baltimore County, you're going to get an additional check for $5,000. Maryland, you're getting another $1,000. So there's $21,000 that is basically paid from that $50,000. Also on top of the SRECs that you receive, that's another, let's call it $60 a month that you get for the life of the system. So when you're talking about taking a loan out for, let's call it $25,000 now instead of $50,000, that monthly payment of taking out a loan is going to be much lower than what your average utility rate from Potomac Edison, BG&E. I know it's Potomac Edison up here, but if you guys are from Baltimore, it's BG&E. So you basically, instead of paying $100 to BG&E a month for Potomac Edison, I'm going to pay $80 for a loan to finance my solar system that's going to produce all of my power. And as you guys know, utility rates are going to increase from the scarcity of fossil fuels. So if the price of coal increases, if the price of coal doubles, your utility rates also are going to double. So if you're paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour, you're then going to pay 24 cents a kilowatt hour if that happens. If you're going to pay a monthly payment of $80, and that's your loan payment per month, you're going to pay that the first month, and you're also going to pay that month 200, or 250, which is 20 years down the road. So, and then once the system's paid off, you own it, and you don't make any payments. So just like if you paid off your mortgage of your home, you no longer pay anything to own your home, except property taxes. But yeah. Any other questions?
I have one more.
Yep.
I was just curious, you know, because the counties that have the incentives, none of them are here.
Yeah, I know.
And I don't live in one of them either.
I know. I was like, I'm gonna feel really bad if she goes, God damn it, why wasn't my county in there?
But, do you know if other counties are going to move in the same direction and offer these incentives?
Potentially,
as well?
potentially. So Hartford County just started, a year and a half ago. Baltimore County, Prince George's County, and Anne Arundel County have been there for 4 years. So, maybe, but that's, I mean, honestly, up to the county. But, you know, things are always changing, you know, they did make it boring, but, you know, it could always change. Yep. Anything else? Cool. Well, thanks for, having me, guys. And, yeah.